Here.
All right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eileen Baden, and I'll be the moderator today for our webinar hosted by the Student Planning Association at ASU to celebrate World Planning Day 2020. I'm the advisor for the Student Planning Association, and I'm also the senior program coordinator for students in the Master of Urban and Environmental Planning program at ASU. I graduated from the MUEP program in 2012. I worked as an environmental planner for about 7 years before coming back to ASU to help students navigate the MUEP program. So I'm also a certified planner with the American Planning Association, and I'm really excited to be here today with our student panelists. They'll be talking about urban planning as a career option and as a profession, and we'll be talking about some planning issues such as community development, housing, transportation, and more. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and let the student panelists do brief introductions.
Okay. Well, I'll start off. My name is Anthony, and I'm a second year MUEP student, and my focus in planning right now is sustainable transportation. Before I hand it off to the other panelists, though, I just wanted to kind of give some background on this event altogether. So the idea kind of spawned of the idea that for me, I didn't know what planning was until much further down the line, once I was already established in a different career. And I get the feeling just from other students that that's kind of the general idea, is it's something you kind of eventually stumble upon. So the idea of putting this together is to reach out to different students and just pass on the importance of what planning is and how much of an impact it has on people's lives, whether they know it or not. And then specifically also to reach out to underrepresented groups, because especially as we try to develop a society that's more diverse and equitable, we want to make sure that all those different perspectives are brought into the mix and planning. Again, it's in a field that has such a big influence on our lives. And normally we would want this to be like my envision for this type of event on planning day would be more of a hands-on, like interactive event in person, but in this current situation, we can't do that. So this is another great way to at least reach out and to spread the word of planning on a fun day like this with all these great people. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Cameron.
Hi there. So my name is Cameron Hendricks, and I'm a freshman urban planning student. And I kind of got into urban planning in 11th grade. I'm one of those few people who kind of figured it out before I went to college. I guess it's because I've always been interested in public policy and political science stuff, but I never really wanted to work in politics. But I did know that I did not really want to go private sector. But there are those options, so I should just leave that out there. But I was also playing those like SimCity games a lot as a kid. And then I just never really realized I could do that as a career. And then in 11th grade, I was like, oh, wait, yeah, I can do this as a career. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated, but that means it's a lot more fun. And right now I'm really interested in transportation and housing as kind of my two things that I intend to follow in my future. That obviously can change because the field of urban planning is very, very broad. So we'll see what happens.
Who's going? Kendra? Oh, it's me. Okay. I was like, kind of forgot. Hi, everyone. I'm Kendra Elner. I'm a second year 4+1 student. I'm in the Accelerated Master's program. And I got into planning because transferred from community college, and I just took some classes and I was like, this is it. It was just amazing taking Jason Kelly's class and learning about all the different aspects of planning and how much it impacts our lives. So here I am today.
Hi, so my name is Noah Schumer. I'm a second year MUEP student at Arizona State. And planning has always been something that has drawn me to some extent. I've always been I've been in awe of cities. I was that 12-year-old that wanted to go on every architectural boat tour and bike tour. Just buildings and the way that things were built always was fascinating to me. I started my college career as a civil engineer, and then eventually switched to geography and urban planning. As I really started to think about, well, how can we start to draw other things into these decisions? How can we start to draw philosophy and policy and kind of this broader swath of topics into planning? And that's what that's what really drew me to move from engineering to planning. I think planning continues to be a way that I really could see myself serving the community as a person of faith. It's one way that, just is serving the community becomes very real and practical and really connected to people's everyday lives. I work in public sector planning right now, and I really enjoy the way in which planning serves the public and hope to continue to do it into the future.
Great. Brian?
Yeah, hey guys, my name is Brian Leva. I am a first-year urban planning student, as well as a first-year sustainability student at ASU. Similar to Anthony, I have a completely unrelated background to planning. Had no clue what it was until I honestly applied for the program. Now I'm here, loving it, learning a lot. And my kind of niche within the field is sustainable urbanism, so looking at how we can plan for sustainable cities moving into the future.
Great. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. Some of my background as well, wanting to bike around town and being able to go places as a teenager was challenging where I lived. And so I saw some of those, challenges in our urban environment as well. So how can we improve, the urban environment for the benefit of the public? So fantastic. Well, so we'll get started with some of our questions. So what is urban planning to you and why is it important?
So I can start off. So I kind of talked about it a little bit before, but really, to me, planning is bringing in those different, like the different social impacts of kind of the way things are built, the way cities are structured, bringing all that into the mix. Because when we build stuff, we will normally we'll just focus on maybe how it looks or what it's supposed to do, but we don't kind of zoom out and think about what it actually, how people interact with that. So I think that's kind of what planning means to me.
Yeah, I think for me, planning is really about kind of conflict resolution. So cities are dense, networks of relationships, all these people in one place with different aims and different goals that are going to compete with one another. And I think really at the heart of planning is thinking about how you plan to resolve those disputes long term, and also how you use the tools available to you to mediate those right now. The architecture and the built environment around us is just kind of is the built version of the way that we think and act and are as people. And those conflicts take place in the city. And so I think planning provides this really unique opportunity to think about the conflicts that always exist in cities and how to plan to, mediate those conflicts and to produce better places to live for all of those people groups in one place, which is a really exciting thing to be doing.
Yeah, and I'll just jump on that as well. I think urban planning to me just involves everything you see around you, no matter if you're in an urban area, suburban area, rural area. It impacts the way we travel, what we eat, the environment, how we communicate and connect with each other. It's an amazing field. And I think a lot of people just don't realize how much it impacts their daily lives and the decisions that are made around like the planning aspects of cities, like just everything I said about transportation and food. So I think it just takes you down as a planner. It can take you down many different avenues. So that's my take.
So to me, urban planning means the analysis of the built environment and how each individual part of said built environment works with each other or works against each other, depending on the situation. But most importantly, it's also how people interact with this built environment. And kind of like what Kendra was saying, these environments can be these small rural farm towns to these big cities like New York. And urban planners have that unique responsibility to be able to kind of understand each of these places and make sure that they're working to the best of their ability, not only with these different sectors of the environment, but also making sure the people that live in this environment are happy and satisfied with their lives.
Well, I mean, like, great answers from everybody. It's hard to kind of end that. I think one thing I'll add, and kind of how Cameron was saying, planning is the ability to study cities, urban areas, rural areas, places where people live, and not only study and research those things, but take an active role and guide their future development. You think of cities that are still standing today, maybe just in ruins. You look at Rome or Greece. Planners really have the opportunity to leave their mark on our current cities and the direction they're going to take moving into the future. It's an absolutely vital role that you have an opportunity to play in, and the field and all of its members. We get to actively, shape those places for the people to help people thrive. So.
Exactly, Brian. Yeah, the planner's primary obligation is to the public interest, and that's really so key in our profession. And I also have to say, I really like thinking about long-term planning and how the impacts that you make today may have long-term and long-range consequences. So as planners, we really want to think long-term as well. So I think that's so important. So what initially sparked your interest in the field of planning? Anthony, do you mind if I start with you?
No, not at all. So mine was a very, very kind of long journey as far as how I arrived at planning, because, but to shorten it up, kind of the background of my mind is how it's always been the challenge of dealing with climate change as a whole. That's kind of the underlying motivation for me. And noticing that the way our cities are built, just by, because I've been fortunate enough to travel to different places, see different cities, see how they all are structured, but also seeing how, or learning about how, I did a lot of reading and learning about how the way these are built have an impact on the bigger issue of climate change. So that was kind of the underlying thing. And why I chose transportation is that is a big contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. So I think if we can plan our cities to reduce that, then I think that's why I'm here.
I'll go ahead. Go ahead, Noah.
Sure. So as to how I arrived in planning, so like I said, in my kind of the opening answer, I was going on a track of engineering. I had spent quite a bit of time, kind of investing in engineering. I went to apply to engineering colleges and went to an engineering like charter high school. And then while I was at Calvin, my previous college, I took a class with a philosopher named Lee Hardy, who wrote this book, which is called The Embrace of Buildings, a second look at walkable city neighborhoods. And he taught a class on the new urbanism, which is a design movement for cities. And it really opened up my mind to the ways in which some of the things I learned in engineering and some of those design processes could be, taken to a broader scale and looked at through other lenses. And that really opened me up to the world of planning. And I spent then the duration of my time at Calvin taking GIS classes and urban geography classes and planning classes to try to start to build up that education. And then I wanted to take it a step further and get a little bit more intense with it, especially on the research side of things. And so I came to Arizona State. So kind of a traditional path into planning. But I think that continues to evolve and grow just through daily experience of living in a city. Always be open to that, to how, your perspectives on cities and how you can be involved with them changes just by the built environment around you and how it changes every day.
Great. Kendra?
Yeah, I would also agree with Anthony too. I'm really passionate about climate change and sustainable urbanism. So I got interested in planning from, like I said in the beginning, taking Jason Kelly's class at ASU. He really he was such a good professor and just showed me how important planning was and all the intricacies and different areas we could go in as professionals. So I also came from like community college and I was studying veterinary school. So I kind of thought like it wasn't for me. So when I transferred to ASU, like I just knew that this was it.
For me, I think what kind of really got me into it was it really started when I was really little. So when I was younger, I was always kind of obsessed with transportation and stuff like that. I believe for 3 or 4 years in a row, I dressed up as a train engineer for Halloween when I was in like kindergarten through first grade, or no, kindergarten through second grade. Oops. But yeah, and then I always just kind of been interested in that. I know I used to want to work in some kind of transportation field, but I never really knew what urban planning was until about junior year of high school. And I should mention, as I have previously, that I've always played those SimCity games as well, instead of, those Call of Duty games and stuff like that. It was always just SimCity. And then, I never really realized that was a career. And then in 11th grade, one of my teachers, he kind of told me about the field and told me what it was about. And then I was like, oh my God, this is what I want to do. And now, even though I'm pretty new in this field, I'm loving it so far. And I know for a fact I'm in the right decision.
Yeah, so I love when people ask me this question because, like Anthony, I kind of tripped and fell into it. I had no clue what planning was. My bachelor's is in geography. I minored in sustainability. So when I was looking for graduate programs, I was looking for sustainability programs, a way to get involved in that realm. Again, to fight climate change and continue our survival on the earth as humans. And then when I was looking at ASU's programs, I saw, they had an ability to do a sustainability program and at the same time do a planning program. And to me, it made economic sense. I can get 2 degrees in the same amount of time. Like, why not do it? So honestly, back in February of this year, 2020, is when I first started digging into the field of planning, started reading planning books, and really figuring out what you can do and what the field is all about. Beyond that, I've had a love for cities my whole life, getting to travel around the world a little bit and seeing what different types of cities are and what they can do and mean for the people that live there really just grew that passion with me. So getting able to be a part of a career field where you can be passionate about what you're learning about and what you're shaping is awesome. So that's kind of how I found it.
Great. Yeah, I love looking at other cities for best practices and then trying to think about, how can we integrate those into some of the practices we're doing in our current hometowns, right? So what can you do with an urban planning degree? And, did you have a specific reason that you chose going to the school that you did? But in particular, I'd like to know, like, what specifically do you plan to do with an urban planning degree?
I'll start this off again. But as far as generally when we talk about planning, as far as different careers, usually it's lumped into either the private sector, which is working for like different firms that design like art. It's kind of a blend of different architecture type and other career fields. But then there's the public sector where you're actually working for local governments, whether it's the city, county, state, different levels, and really kind of just doing the work there. One area that I've also kind of been interested to is also kind of as like a policy analyst. So working for whether, people who are working in political office and just kind of advising them on different areas, and specifically for me, transportation policy, because at higher levels, it has a big impact. So I think in some ways that's one area I've kind of looked at is how can we look at the transportation policy, maybe even at the federal level. Nationally, what are we doing because that trickles down and eventually has an effect on our local policies. So that's one area as far as urban planning.
Yeah, I kind of came in with a little bit more of a traditional mindset of like what I wanted to do within planning, but the planning degree can actually be really versatile. I'm a little bit colored by the fact that I'm in a master's program, and so which is a little bit more of a dedicated professional program. But I would really say that beyond even just like an urban planner in a city hall, for example, it's really anybody who is especially interested in kind of the systems that affect urban places. So one thing that one field that I think is really important for urban planners to consider is like environmental planning, and how we do this long range planning for the areas that surround cities or that affect cities, or just even our, say like a national forest, somewhere that isn't all that directly connected to an urban center, for example. These places need long range management too. It's really any job that is looking at big picture planning, kind of making decisions, building a decision-making process, whatever that looks like. An urban planning degree, especially at the undergrad level, can be a really useful tool. If you're interested in cities, or just, again, kind of that systems thinking, I think a planning degree really prepares you well for tackling any job that requires that kind of long-range thinking, kind of management, and systems management. I think that's really useful.
I'll go next. So what I hope to take with my planning degree is kind of just dabble in different types of fields. Right now I am doing a internship at the city of Apache Junction, and that's been a really interesting experience because even though like from classes, I don't think we get the full experience, and it's really hard to get the full experience from the classroom, but getting an internship and a job on after school or during school is definitely, I would recommend that. It kind of meshes together and everything just starts making sense. Like once I started that job, I was like, wow. So like this land use, this zoning, like it's all just coming together. So I hope after this program with like my degree, I just hope to, take it anywhere, and whether it's private or public or nonprofit, I'm really just interested in helping the community, saving the environment and just promoting healthy cities. So, and I just chose ASU because it was convenient, and, I've lived here my whole life. So it was kind of a no-brainer. And a lot of people think that getting like a master's degree program really depends on like what you want to focus on. But I think as a person, you can just take it anywhere. It doesn't have to be where you want to stay. That's just me.
For me, what I kind of want to do with my degree once I graduate is either go to grad school or maybe spend a couple of years in private sector planning to kind of define my niche. Because in my discussions with private planners, which is also another reason why I like the field, because everyone's so open to talk about their experience. It seems like with private planning, you work on a lot of different projects in a kind of broad area. So for example, housing, like there's a lot of ways you can go with that. So I kind of want to define my niche interests. And then that way, once I have that niche after a couple of years and have some more money, I can go back to grad school and kind of explore the niche a little bit more. And that way, once I'm graduated, then I'm all set. And then I am confident in what I want to do and how I can do it with my future. And I have considered, like where I want to go in government. I definitely want to work on, I think, the local level specifically, because it seems like a lot of those projects are a lot more hands-on, a lot more specific, and a lot more community oriented. So that way, you can speak with people, you get to hear about their concerns more than you would on the federal level, for example.
All right, yeah, I'll just add like two more things to that, because I think we covered a lot of different things you can do with the planning degree. First, just want to riff off of what Noah said. He's right. A planning degree is such a versatile thing, whether it's an undergrad or at the graduate level. I think planning school really teaches you to think system-wide. And that's such an important thing. As a planner, a lot of times you're a jack of all trades. You've got to know a lot of different niche fields within the planning program or within the planning field, and be able to, talk educated, knowledgeably on these different types of topics, whether it's advising, your city's government or devising a specific type of development. So the versatility that you gain from going to planning school is amazing. The second thing I would add is something that I'm kind of more interested in is doing a lot of international planning. So planning for developing nations, settlements, communities across the world that maybe aren't at that big city level yet. And there's a lot of opportunities to do that as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys. Yes, definitely a lot of, you learn a lot of really great skills that I think can be used in a wide variety of jobs later on, even if it doesn't have the word planner, it might have research analyst. And I love that Kendra mentioned public, private, nonprofit. Exactly. It can be good to have a wide variety too of some experience, maybe with your internships, just to see how they all interact together as well. And it's really interesting how we work with such a diverse range of professionals, from engineers to city councils to water policy folks. And so yes, definitely a lot of interrelatedness with other professions as well. So knowing now what you all do about your college experience and the profession, what is one thing that you would advise your high school or freshman self?
One thing I would definitely say is that just in general, just to, for myself to really take advantage of just different clubs, activities, and even within those really embrace leadership opportunities. I did have some of those type of opportunities when I was younger, like in high school, and even just from then on, but I don't feel like I fully took advantage of those leadership positions. So I think that's something that I would do. And I think that's something that is important as a planner, because in some ways you have to take the initiative to really talk to all these different groups. I think it's important to develop that skill.
Yeah, I know most of this, I think most of this webinar is going to focus on some professional aspects of planning, but for my freshman self and for anybody who is a younger student, I would really say think about the things beyond just like the traditional internships and things that you want to spend your time doing. I think that when you're forming as a planner or as somebody who's developing as into a career, I think thinking about the ways in which you get involved in other things in the community, build community around you, and how that shapes you to be prepared to actually serve, the public interest, something, things that are beyond you. I think that's really important. I was part of a program at my old college called Project Neighborhood, which is like an intentional living community in like downtown neighborhoods. And that was really inspiring for me and really shaped the way that I saw the planning practice. And so really get involved with those things and build community around you, because I think that goes a long way towards building a well-rounded life, but also being prepared for the challenges that come with working with people in a field like planning, which is all about people.
Yeah, and I would add to that and say, you don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to know exactly what you're going to do. I feel like as planners, we like to plan for the future a lot. So I think we can take it easy on ourselves, but again, push ourselves to those limits, get involved in the community, and in those leadership roles. I think just, doing things that we're not comfortable with all the time and just putting ourselves out there. I think that is a huge thing I would tell my freshman self, is just don't be scared.
Yeah, and sorry to double back here, but Kendra, you're so right. I think there's also, benefits in just like, if you see that job that is something you want to learn, but doesn't fit with, say, that perfect ideal version of the career that you want, but it's something that you want to challenge yourself in, do it. Like, it will be so valuable for you. Definitely do that. I would definitely tell my freshman self that. That's a great point, Kendra.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it's not going to be perfect, like we might have our dream jobs, but it's never going to be exactly what you expect.
Yeah.
For me, I guess my advice that I would have for my high school self would be follow your interests and be happy about it. Sure, it might be very niche and maybe a little nerdy, but if you love it, you should go crazy with it. You should go as far as you can with that. And that could be as things as little as what was mentioned earlier, is like being involved with your community. You can go to these like planning community meetings, and even if you don't have questions, you can see what it's like, and that's free, which is pretty neat because now that I'm in college, nothing is free. But you should make it your primary objective to kind of follow exactly what you want to do. And it probably would be unconventional, but it's something that you'd be happy doing, because when I was younger, I never really wanted to be a person that hated my job. And so I'd always just go out of my way to find these interests and find these hobbies of stuff that, could turn into a job. And then that's kind of how I found urban planning, with the help of, my educators. And that's important, because your educators are there to help you, and they're going to help you to the best of their ability. So, if you have an interest in like social studies or something, go to your social studies teacher or something. And remember, that's free. So take advantage of it when you can.
All right, what did I tell my freshman self? Man, he was a long shot from where I am now. Yeah, I've had a different type of life story up to this point. So I think I would tell myself to shoot for those dream jobs. And if you fail, learn from that experience and try again. I mean, give yourself the opportunity over and over again to learn and grow until you can actualize the life and the goals that you've set forth for yourself. We have our fate in our own hands, and a lot of times we don't really realize that. We can shape our lives how we see that. It just takes a little bit of effort, of effort. So just keep trying, keep learning, keep growing until you can get where you really feel like you want to be in life.
Great, thanks, Brian. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think showing up is half the battle. So if there are some professional organizations and you can just show up to the meeting and listen in and participate, you'll be surprised what kind of great connections you'll make. But I also really want to emphasize what Cameron said: go to public meetings. And honestly, participate as a member of the public. Planners want to hear your input. What kind of input do you have on any bike lanes or bikeways that are going to be going into your community? Do you want to see more of those? Even just voicing an opinion that, yes, we like this plan, is very useful for the members of the public. So showing up is half the battle to whatever meeting you are going to. And it really means a lot as somebody who's been in the profession for a while, to see youth come and participate. It really means a lot, but definitely attend those public meetings when you can, because community development planning is so important, and we want to hear your input. So Kendra, can you tell us a little bit more about community development planning and why that's important?
Yeah, so community development planning involves interacting with the community and being that facilitator between, whether it's organization, the government, or private sector. You can be that bridge for the community that doesn't understand why they're putting a McDonald's down the street, or why they're putting a gas station right next to a school. I don't know, stuff like that. I mean, it's really important to engage the community, educate the community, and make them feel heard. I think that is huge. And I'm also taking a creative placemaking class, which involves working with artists and, changing the narrative of some not so great things like construction that's very disruptive in the community. And community development can, help reach out to those people in the community to help foster a better narrative and just create, better conversations.
Better future, yeah.
I'll just add on to that. I think it's when it's kind of also what Kendra was saying too, but I think it's really just bringing together kind of a community, creating a vision, a shared vision of what they want to look in the future, how they want to look in the future. Because as planners, we have that knowledge of how to translate that into an actual, document or action plan. So I think that's why community planning, development planning is really important.
No, I think no man is an island. And I think that every idea in a city that has lasting impact on its citizens, is groups of people coming together, and making, whether it's a neighborhood or a group of like-minded individuals, whatever that looks like. But that's hard work. And I think one of the best parts about community development planning, and I think that one of the most important parts of it, is drawing people together who are starting to build those ideas together, fostering those environments where those ideas can actually start to take place. That's really important for a city trying to solve some really sticky challenges that are very difficult to solve from the top down, and will probably involve a lot of people making the changes in the areas that they know best. And that just allows people who, if you're just trying to hire people for a job, for example, they might not come up on your radar, but they're ones who know the neighborhoods really well, who know the people very well. They know who the doers are, who the civic minded, people who are ready to make change happen. And it just builds I guess that fabric of relationships up that you need to make lasting change. So I think community development planning is really, really important and doesn't get the attention that it deserves in making cities a better place.
Great, thank you guys. Well, I'll keep moving through some of the questions because we have quite a bit to cover, but definitely I can't agree more. We definitely need to continue looking at community development planning as such an important focus for planners. But I also wanted to ask, how do decisions on housing affect the community you live in? Anthony, could you get us started?
Yeah, so when we talk about housing, first off, when it comes to planning or like how it's built into the city's kind of code or everything, is that typically we have the different areas kind of zoned, is what we keep using the word zoning. So basically zoning just means this part is set aside for this type of use, like residential, how like where people live. But then within within residential, there's the single family homes, just the kind of standalone that we're used to, like in kind of very suburban, typical suburban neighborhood, just a bunch of single family housing developments. But then there's multifamily, like apartments and stuff like that. And the city kind of decides where those types of housing are developed and how many different units can be put in one spot. And where those, where those actually are located. And those have a lot of impacts on what happens for the rest of the city. This can come into play as far as how much you pay for rent, and if you can even afford rent, and then that gets to the issue of also homelessness, which people experiencing homelessness, it's not just, there's a reason why, especially with the housing affordability crisis we're going through right now, that ties into that. People can't find homes, they can't afford it. So there's different things that the city does that has an impact on not just housing, but other parts of city life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Again, I mean, affordable housing is so key, and I know students have often expressed some challenges, with that. And it's really not just students; it's actually a nationwide problem. So I know that the city of Phoenix has recently taken some measures to really try to look and actually make progress with affordable housing. I've seen some great mixed use collaborations with developers, and the city can help to promote policies that help to developers want to build affordable housing. So that's where you create those win-win solutions as planners. Great. So, next question. How are transportation and housing related?
So for me, what I do oftentimes get this question as an urban planner because I live in Washington, D.C. primarily. And when I used to go to high school, like I'd say about 90% of people either took the public bus or the subway system into school. And that's because we had it available to us and it was cheap. But here in Phoenix, chances are you're probably using a car, or I don't know if they still use school buses or not, or you're using a school bus. So that's just like one big thing, because what kind of building you live in is important for transportation, right? So for like a bus line, it's easier to get 25 people in a bus if you have maybe 25 people in an apartment than 25 people all spread out in these single family homes, because that bus has to travel more distance, which takes more time. So obviously so obviously bus systems aren't really a great idea for single family development, generally speaking, if you want it to be affordable. And arguably bus systems are still important, but there's only so much you can do with a community budget. But that being said, it's also things like traffic and stuff like that, because if you live out in the suburbs, you are probably going to need a car. And you can't really, and because there really just isn't much in the United States, at least, of like this of kind of suburban to urban transportation networks, you do need a car, and that creates traffic and that creates stress, and none of that is good. So it's vital. I should say it is vital that we understand this kind of network and understand how we can use this in our future, but kind of maybe get less of reliance on just using cars all the time, because it is obviously not great for the environment and it's not great for your health either.
Yeah, to build on that, Cameron, I think that when we talk about affordable housing, we tend to just think about the rents, right? Or about housing prices, which is, as those tend to escalate, or those are escalating in a lot of US cities, it's something we want to think about. But there's a second component to that, and that's the transportation costs of wherever you live, right? So let's say that, if you live down the street from your job, you don't have to drive to work every day. And so you're not paying for gas. And, in theory, in an ideal city where everything is, within walking distance, or I suppose that's one kind of ideal city, your transportation costs are much lower. And that's a real problem today, as cities tend to start to get more expensive, which in people, I suppose, get pushed out. When people get pushed out, now you're getting saddled with higher and higher transportation costs, even, if housing is a bit cheaper outside of the city. And you end up with this dynamic where the burden of owning a car, which is more than just gas, it's the maintenance, it's the insurance, it's all these, it's a pretty expensive, pretty much required cost for every person in the United States. When we continue to build housing that spreads people further and further out like that, it does create a lot of problems in the costs that people have to take on just to complete their daily needs and to commute. And so that's something we really want to think about when we're planning for housing, is not just thinking about the rent, but thinking about the transportation costs that are associated with living in a certain place and being able to access everything that you need in a day. And I think one problem you see in a lot of cities is that theoretically, as you get out from the city center, away from jobs or things like that, housing should get cheaper. But when you build, large single family homes on acre lots that are really expensive to buy, it's very difficult. There's nowhere really that's easy for people to kind of enter into the housing market, and then our existing affordable housing programs are overwhelmed. So we need to think comprehensively about housing and transportation to actually produce affordable housing that puts people in relative proximity to where they actually want to go.
Great, thanks, Noah. Yeah, I want to mention that as certified planners, we do have a special responsibility to plan for the needs of the disadvantaged and to promote racial and economic integration. And so I just think quality of life is a big thing that planners think about. And so exactly just what you were just talking about, Noah, is so key. Great. So how is Phoenix transportation different than other cities? And maybe Cameron, you could touch on this with your experience in DC.
Right. So like I said earlier, when we lived in DC, so there was great public transportation, and frankly, everyone kind of viewed having a car as a liability if you lived in the city and like what you spent most of the time in your city. Because like I just said, we have just a great transportation network. But in Phoenix, since this is single family development, it is kind of hard to find any like good bus system. Because it's simply just not exactly the most viable thing in these types of developments. So obviously a lot more people here use a car and don't ever use the bus, because A, it takes a while for you to get there for most people, and B, it probably doesn't go where you need it to go. So, it's also the same thing with like New York City. Their transportation system is very great if you don't use a car, because the subway there, if you live in Manhattan, it pretty much goes wherever you need to go. DC, we do a pretty good job of that. However, there are some things that we can do to improve, but it is definitely, I think, at least compared to other US cities, I think we have probably one of the better transportation networks in the country.
I want to kind of touch on that or add to that as well, since I'm born and raised in Phoenix. And I think it's amazing to see how Tempe has drastically changed and how it's actually very, like, I don't like driving in Tempe because especially downtown. So I think the way planners can, change the trajectory of how we, commute by creating this high density area and facilitating that public transit, like that can really shape a different path and lead us towards more of a, public transit centered area. Because I personally, I don't like driving a lot, and being in Phoenix it's great, but it's also just like, oh my gosh, the traffic, the freeways. I would rather take public transit. So I need to go down to DC one day.
I think Phoenix has a lot of opportunity because we have such wide streets that we have a lot of opportunity to build complete streets, to narrow the driving lanes to maybe 4 instead of 6, and then have like a really wide bike lane. So I see a lot of opportunity in Phoenix. I've also seen a lot of growth. The light rail was just built when I moved here about 10 years ago. And then now the streetcars coming in through Tempe. And actually, I think we also have to remember that as planners, we need to shift how we plan based on changes in technology, because now with the scooters, what maybe wasn't accessible before for somebody, like their house might have been too far away, maybe now they can scoot that 2 miles to the bus, or, and so I think those scooters, and honestly smartphones too, just the way that people use them and can engage in public platforms and like engage in community development is so key. And so actually technology really impacts what we as planners do too. But let's see, Brian, do you have some additional reasons why why we should encourage public transportation?
Yeah, I mean, so depending on where you're at and who you're talking to, anybody could recommend public transportation for a lot of reasons. One thing I think about when talking about public transportation being important is creating equity for citizens in a city. A lot of people, their only mode of getting around, their only mode of transportation is with public transportation. So a bus, a subway system, maybe even Uber or taxis. They rely on that completely. So a city investing in their public transportation is vital in creating a thriving environment for their citizens. Another lens that you can look at it from is public transportation is inherently more sustainable. If you have less citizens relying on their cars, you're going to decrease the amount of time that people are spending in their cars, the amount of time that people are spending in traffic. And therefore, that means they're spending or utilizing less resources. As cities build up with transportation in mind, they're able to build denser. You're able to get people from one place, their home, to their work or to leisure, any different facet of their life, utilizing a singular mode of transportation. Again, whether it's like a subway system or train or light rail, rather than just having everybody fend for themselves and their vehicles. So you can recommend public transportation for a number of different reasons.
I also kind of wanted to add on to that because there was a study that came out a couple of years ago that I was reading, and it said that if you're not carpooling, if you're using a car to get to work, chances are you're going to be a lot more stressed out, and that's really important because how you get to work or how you get to wherever you're going, it's important for your health. If you're taking a bus, ideally you might be walking maybe five minutes. So you get your morning started with a nice walk to the bus, and that way you can see your city a little bit more, and you're a little bit more relaxed, and you're not dealing with traffic, people sideswiping you and getting angry at you and getting angry honks, among other gestures. So that's great. And it's also not just cars. It's not general public transit in general, but it's also what public transit you use to get to work also helps reduce the amount of stress you have in your life. And as we all know, having stress in your life is not a great thing, not just for your daily health, but also long-term health. So if you have a lot more stress, you're higher risk for heart attacks and anxiety, and nobody wants a heart attack or anxiety.
Yeah, I think there's this tendency to see it as kind of a zero-sum game, though. Like Elon Musk, tweeted famously a couple months ago, like public transit is the worst because it doesn't take you where you want to go when you want to go. There's this sense that like, oh, cars give absolute freedom and things like that. And it's important to consider why we use cars, right? It does give us some degree of individual mobility at a level that has never been really available before. I could drive anywhere in the Phoenix metro area within an hour, because of the car. And that's some in the right place is a good thing. But as cities grow, you start to get these issues of congestion and inefficiency that just builds up as you're trying to stuff that many cars into a limited amount of space. I mean, we'll probably talk more about why cities develop that way in very limited, dense areas. And so we want to think about kind of that mode choice, like how do we make choices to be able to use the most efficient type of infrastructure for that type of urban environment? In rural areas, people are going to use cars and they're really useful for getting around. But in dense cities, how can we promote public transit in a way that, utilizes space effectively to get more people into these places, to do more urban activity? I think that's going to be one of the most important questions in the 21st century for transportation is just which mode should we use where, and how do we blend them all together? So I think public transportation is really important to think about, especially with that congestion question. But it's important to balance that and think about it not as a zero-sum game, but as designing the most sustainable possible system of infrastructure.
Great. Yeah, I think that actually will take us very well into our next question about what is sustainable urbanism? Kendra, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, and I'll make this brief because kind of running short on time. So sustainable urbanism basically means, combining environmentally friendly and socially inclusive methods into our planning. And there's a bunch of factors that play into that as well. And I think planners in the 21st century are seeing the impacts of the 20th century, and we really want to change the trajectory of the way we plan cities and how we can, turn to alternatives for transit, housing, and everything to make things sustainable and resilient.
Great. Let's see. So, and then also, what as individuals can we do to advance sustainable communities? Noah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I really wanted to take this in kind of an action-oriented way. So we tend to look at problems like climate change and, the issues of, deforestation, these very high-level things, right? And just be overwhelmed by them. It's important to remember that you can start where you are today. An example of that is just, one thing to try is to take a walk in your neighborhood. Look around and see the way that your neighborhood is built and what's missing from your neighborhood. Where do you see, for example, on a recent walk of mine, I just noticed the fact that just about every square inch of space in my neighborhood is paved with asphalt or concrete. And start to think about what can we do to change that? Whether it's taking civic action, whether it's doing even smaller steps, like just in the meantime, taking care of picking up trash in our neighborhood, or, seeing where there's opportunities in your neighborhood to say, start a garden or do these very small things, because I think that the more you do those things, if everybody did those things, it would be a much more sustainable and verdant society. But also it continues to keep your eyes open to the ways that you can continue to do, advocate for a more sustainable community and contribute to it yourself in very real ways that I think have these positive snowball effects that get more and more people involved. I think that's how we build sustainable communities, as hard as that is, because there's no silver bullet for really challenging, complex solutions like climate change or urban pollution or things like that.
Take it a step at a time. Yep.
Yep.
Great. Well, I don't want to skip some of our questions here at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. What is the difference between equity and equality? What does it mean for urban planning issues? Anthony?
So yeah, those are typically used kind of interchangeably, but they kind of mean two different things. So equality is basically everybody gets the same thing. Everybody gets, everybody gets the same thing. But when it comes to equity, that's more about boosting up those that historically or in the past or for whatever reason haven't been afforded those same opportunities, and kind of giving those groups a leg up to kind of catch them up to everybody else so that you can reach that level where everyone has an equal amount of access to opportunity. As far as for urban planning issues, and we've kind of touched on it a little bit here already when it comes to transportation, but it's keeping in mind the areas where planning has left out certain groups, or the ways cities have been built have disadvantaged different areas, unfortunately. We have to recognize that is part of our history. But now it's, okay, how do we correct that? How do we focus on equity, center everything around equity in all the projects we do to correct that?
Great. Yes. And I think us as planners, we're always seeking continual improvement of ourselves as well in our profession. And another one of the AICP, the Certified Planners criteria, is that we should seek social justice by working to expand choice and opportunity for all persons. So these next two questions I might just merge together a little bit. So what is the history between urban planning and racism? And what can we do to eradicate some of these policies? Kendra, I know you wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Planning has been historically and systemically just, disadvantaged minority communities, people of color, indigenous communities. And that's just kind of the way America was structured. So, and it's not the planner's fault at all, but I think in today's age, we are recognizing the importance of trying to change those narratives. And I think, again, there's a lot of history between urban planning and racism, like with the freeways, displacement, the redlining, the housing situations. There's just so much. So what we can do to eradicate it is, one, representation. I'd like to, be really proud that I'm a Black woman and, showing up for the field and, just making my presence heard, and just being at those tables. And then two is just to keep pushing for better policies and better methods and reaching out to the community. That community development is so important. Listening to the community that we're serving and not just, taking the lens of the planner and saying we know what's best. Like, we don't really care what you guys think. So I think we need to, be proactive and be proactive.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit on that is that one, I think first we need to, not just planners, but just people in general, educate ourselves on the history, and really that's the only way we're going to identify where some of these policies, how they got baked into the system. So then we can work to change them. And really with a lot of these policies, just for housing as an example, is a big example, is a lot of these policies, that's the question of who's benefiting from this, because that will probably lead you to maybe it's affecting one group or benefiting one group. So I think when we ask that question, and then we can, then look to where can we change this to make sure that everybody in the future will be able to benefit from this, because housing has intergenerational effects. So that's something that can be passed along, as far as property that can be passed along to future generations. And again, that opportunity was not afforded to everybody in the 20th century. So, and we're still seeing those patterns play out right now. So fixing that is going to take that approach.
Yeah, I think education is super important. Taking it upon ourselves to read and learn every day about the issues that our field has unfortunately promulgated. And then also using our platforms individually and then within the field to elevate those voices that need to be elevated, that have been underrepresented throughout history. What are we doing now to fight systemic racism? I think this is one of the first times, at least in my life, where things feel different. And just to give like a planning specific way in which the field can help with these issues, you can look to Minneapolis and their elimination of single family zoning. And what will that do to maybe not end systemic racism, but how can that help build up those communities that have sometimes been, not sometimes, a lot of the time been left behind in the past. So how can we use our different tools in our toolbox to address those issues?
Yeah.
I think one thing that's like really important to notice about what we are doing now, what we need to do, is I kind of believe that fighting systemic racism begins at the home. So that means, you know, not only like just in your household and educating yourself, but also like from a planner's perspective of how homes impact how people live, because obviously the home is the most important part of, you know, how you interact with urban planning, than the average person does, because that is where you live. And I think one of the things that urban planners do kind of have the not great burden of having is we have to deal with the mayor's office, who tends to be bankrolled by developers and other interests who want the like biggest bang for their buck. And so obviously, you know, requiring developers to have affordable housing units it's a struggle, and it's a worthwhile one, but it's going to take a long time for us to get there, and it's going to be a long and hard fight, but it's something that needs to be done. And there's also things that are that would be less impactful, but that would still generate some pretty good results. And that's things like parking space minimums. So for a lot of housing developments in the United States, I think we're probably one of the only countries that has parking space minimums. And that is kind of like where zoning codes are set up so that way in front of your house or like in an apartment building, there has to be a minimum amount of parking spaces. And that takes up space for homes and takes up space for homes and apartments. And that's not great, because really, instead of having these parking spaces, we should be having houses for people to live that are actually nice to live in and are up to code. And that's important. And we have to remember that these fights are hard, but we need to do them, or there's no chance that we can really end systemic racism.
Yeah. I guess just to close the thought on equity and equality in cities, I think one part of the planning profession it's still a problem, but is even more of a historical problem, was the way in which we did top-down planning in ways that really harmed people. So for example, redlining was done by federal agencies who, you know, did these acts of using housing mortgages to essentially segregate neighborhoods. Public housing, freeway development, where we carved freeways through the lowest income neighborhoods possible. And even today's kind of neighborhood aid programs a lot of times say this neighborhood is low income or is struggling or doesn't have a lot of resources. That's a problem. And so we're going to tell them what those problems are and, you know, solve them from a top-down strategy. And I think the more tools that planners can give to listen to these communities and find out what those problems actually are, you know, and what is actually they feel is holding that neighborhood back, and then making sure that they have more opportunities to actually do the work of building the neighborhood in the way that they want it to go and giving people that ability to shape their neighborhood's outcomes, I think is really important, and something that we've denied to large swaths of, you know, American people for centuries. And so I think the more that we can do that, and the more that there's more of that kind of teamwork between planners and, you know, residents in these neighborhoods, the better off that we'll be. The more, I guess, we'll promote more neighborhood equity.
Yeah, I definitely think like as planners, we serve as advocates for the public and for the public good. And Another part from the AICP Code of Ethics is that we shall educate the public about planning issues and their relevance to our daily lives. And so exactly, we should be going out to these communities that are disadvantaged and need it most and teaching them about planning, what it is and how they can, engage in the process. And so that's why I'm so glad you all were here today on World Planning Day to talk to us about some of these issues and really start to talk to youth and possibly future planning students about why planning is so important and how we see that we can really help our communities. So just as our last question, what are some of your goals as a planner and what do you hope to achieve as a planner?
Yeah, for me, and it's kind of already kind of touched on a little bit, really, is that really just being in that fight to kind of shift the policies and everything, and at different levels. I don't know exactly what level, maybe federal level, if that's kind of a one route, but basically shift it to more sustainable transportation options and make it easier, more accessible to everybody. I think that's a big challenge, but if I'm going to do anything with my life, I feel like that's the most important thing.
I think something that I really want to do with the work that I do in planning, in thinking, this might seem a little bit abstract, but I think it's very real in our cities today, is really trying to rebuild community. I think a lot of cities right now suffer from a high degree of isolation, of people feeling very divided and very separate from one another. We've built a world, an urban world, where that is kind of the way that things go. People are divided by, income and race, and on top of it, just even when you live near other people, just there's very people live in these and kind of feel like they live in isolation. I think that's one of the things I want to tackle most, is how do we use planning to rebuild community and get cities back to doing the things that they're designed to do best, which is bring people together to make ideas, for social harmony, for whatever that is, bringing those people together and providing more opportunities for them to actually come together and actually feel like they're building a cohesive community. And whether that means changing the built environment to make that possible, to encouraging more, places for that kind of interaction to happen, whether it's third places or public spaces, things like that. Whatever it is, I want to be a part of changing this era of just real isolation that we've built in our cities.
Yeah, that was great, Noah. And for me, I would just add to that is I want everyone to have access to the basic necessities of life. As a planner, it is hard because we're just kind of facilitators and we don't make the final decisions. But as advocates and facilitators, we can move that conversation and those policies so people can live. So they have the same opportunity to survive. I think that's huge. And on top of that, just saving our planet. That's my huge goals.
For me, I think it's to help people. I was always just kind of raised in this idea of it should be everyone's goal to help people on whatever level that they can. And I feel like this is probably the best way for me to do that because, because obviously climate change is important and everything like that. And also just making sure that people are happy where they live is vital, especially when we consider systemic racism and stuff like that, because cities are still displacing people, primarily people of color, all over the place. And I don't understand how somebody could be happy if they're now just being essentially just kicked out because they can't afford anything anymore because places are getting too expensive. And that honestly, that does hurt a little bit because when I lived in DC, we're going through a bit of some pretty bad gentrification. And in high school, I went to a public school, so we had kids from all over the city. And I did lose a couple of my friends. They had to go to different school districts and stuff like that because their family just couldn't afford to live in DC anymore. And even the prices of basic things like milk and water are getting more and more expensive because stores that used to sell them, they're either going out of business, like Whole Foods and stuff like that, where the people that do go to Whole Foods can afford Whole Foods. So those are, those young new workers who have college degrees. And those are also the people, ironically, who are living in these new developments in these very, very freshly gentrified areas, in these luxury apartments that have been built on Black neighborhoods. And that's not good at all. And urban planners, we need to do a better job making sure that people have a home where they've always been if they want to stay. Because if we don't do that, then we fail not only ourselves, but we fail our city and we fail our communities.
All right, I'll keep this short and sweet on my part. My goal is just to make the world a better place in whatever way I can in every day that I live, in every action that I choose to take and decision that I choose to make. Yeah.
There's a lot of work to be done. So I commend you all and I wish you all the best of luck. I agree there's so much work we need to do in our communities to continue making them the best places that we want to live and that we want other people to live in as well. So yes, there's urban planning there. You can never get bored. There's so many different topics and important aspects to focus on, from transportation to food access to our education systems to transportation, how you get to point A to point B. That planning is really critical. So I commend you all again for being here and being such stellar planners. I know you're all going to do a great job. So again, happy World Planning Day, and thank you so much for being here and joining us.
Yeah, and I just
Thank you, everybody.
I was going to say thanks to the participants. I see they showed up, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation and hope that we enlightened you about urban planning and that you want to take action in the community and your future. So thank you.
And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us we're the Student Planning Association at ASU. And you can contact me directly if you'd like, eileen.baden@asu.edu.
And this will also be online on YouTube shortly after. So thanks for joining us. And I kind of want to take a group picture if you guys want to. Okay. All right. So I'll do it. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Got it. All right. Thanks, guys. This was really fun.
Happy Sunday.
Yes.
Happy World Planning Day, guys.
Happy World
See you
Planning
guys.
Happy World Planning Day. Thank you.